Welcome, admins far and wide. We're so pleased that you could come and join us today from wherever you happen to hail from. This session is entitled Auditing Your Operations, and it's designed to help you evaluate your organization objectively. It's based on a website that Brian and I found called opsreportcard.com. That was a website that was developed by a guy named Tom Limoncelli. He is a longtime system administrator and author on the subject and developed these 30-plus components of items that many good IT departments use. So there are 7 operational areas, and that has strong ties back to Tom's book called Time Management for System Administrators. You can find that on Amazon. We'll have a link for it later. Keep in mind that these sources are sysadmin focused. They're not necessarily user focused, so take these with a big grain of salt. They may not be directly applicable to your environment, or at least some of them may not, and that's okay. So the idea here is that you're going to look through these, determine which are applicable to you, and then implement them so that you can free up your time to better serve your users. As they say, you want to, when you're on an airplane and something unforeseen happens, you want to put on your own oxygen mask before you assist others. So again, take into account that both Tom and Peter Grace, his partner, have a lengthy background as sysadmins, and as such, these items are written from that point of view. And without further ado, we'll introduce your speakers for today. My name is Dennis Wurster. I am the Associate Director for Computing Services at Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. Eastman is a world-class leader in music education, spanning 9 decades of producing award-winning graduates, boasting Guggenheim Fellows, Grammy, and ASCAP award winners on its distinguished faculty.
My name is Brian Meehan. Thanks to my office being located in kind of an obscure portion of the campus, I've managed to remain employed by the Allendale Columbia School as their Director of IT for the past 7 years. Prior to that, I was an IT consultant, a network engineer, graphic designer, EMT, firefighter. I wear many hats. How is it that we get this the 9 o'clock one against Greg Nagel again
Every
this year?
Every year.
But that's okay because
Competition is good.
That's the Python Objective-C, and we know the language that most sysadmins typically use, which is profanity. So we're good on that.
So you might remember us from some of our previous talks, Mac Administration, the Fundamentals in 2014.
Troubleshooting, the 9 indispensable rules for finding bugs fast, which was in 2015.
Yep, and this same talk we did last year. So if this is your second time here, thank you. We appreciate that. It looks like many people are here for the first time, though, and we like that, too. So we did a poll before we got started. I'll do it one more time. How many people here are in K-12 education? Okay, I'm going to say that's roughly 25%. Yep. And how many are in higher ed? Okay, that's a lot. It's almost half. And private industry? Okay, and MSPs and consultants? Okay, smattering of those, too. Very good. We'll try and tailor some of these discussion points to match that.
So this is going to be a top-down look at your operations as we go through. There's not really a lot of magic here, a lot of common sense things that we're going to take a look at, asking yourself questions and really writing down the answers, because you got to commit to this. Doing this in your head as an exercise, unfortunately, is not a real audit of your operations. You take the pens that you got from all the vendors outside. I know I saw all of you grabbing some pens, so that's all right. Put them to paper and start discussing it, not just here, but that's a great place to start, but with your team when you return from MacAdmins, and that's where the action really happens. You got to watch out for deeper problems, communications, maturity, skill, ability to execute, because these can derail any sort of best practice. But this is a good place to start from.
Right. The idea here is that you're going to figure out what your gaps might be and then attempt to fill those. And every organization has some blind spots. And although we've never met you or necessarily been to your organization, we're going to try and help you identify them.
But we're sure you're all awesome.
This presentation is full of suggestions, and many effective departments use a lot of these. And this is just advice, but it's up to you to act on them. And it's okay to acknowledge that some of these, again, may not apply to you.
Think of this as like the sysadmin's version of Baz Luhrmann's Wear Sunscreen. So we're going to assume that you're not one of the 2 guys at the top of this picture. You're probably one of these 2. So we're going to assume that as a sysadmin, either brand new, shiny, and bright-eyed, or crusty and curmudgeonly, you're comfortable with terms like automation, production and pre-production, testing, backups, patching, networking. Those are terms we're going to use throughout this. An interesting exercise when you get back is to let your boss run through this audit on their own and then compare notes, before you share what you brought back from MacAdmins. At the very least, you might find that they have a greater appreciation for the work that you do. And you might uncover a couple things too that you can work together on it. As a reference, Jim Ressman's talk yesterday, your boss sucks, but it might be your fault. This might be a good conversation piece to take along to that.
So today we're going to help you conduct that self-assessment that we talked about of your department. We're going to help you answer yes or no to a series of questions, and you don't have to share your results with anybody else. It might be helpful in considering what sessions to attend or what videos to watch. So there's lots of experts here that can help you. Last night's trivia notwithstanding.
Yes.
Also, we're going to take questions by the Google Slides Q&A feature. There's a URL at the top of the screen. Be sure to type in any question you want. We'll also throw the catch box around if that's something you really want to do. That's fine too. And one unique feature of that is that you can also upvote questions if you had a similar idea and want to see that come up to the top. And we'll address those questions at about 3 different points during the presentation. And if we have time left over at the end, we'll take them then too.
And you can follow along on your own, answering the questions as we go through on a notepad or a piece of paper as we go through the questions here, because you'll see them all.
Right.
Ops report card will also give you a printed out version, and packed in the trunk of our car is 60 copies of this.
No.
That we
Find us later. We'll make sure to get you on. But it's let's roll.
Yeah.
Ready to run into it?
Let's go.
Okay.
So the goal of any IT department is to deliver service that is effective, timely, and kind. I used to train new call center reps, and I would tell them that callers want 3 things. They want an answer. They want it quickly, pleasantly, and with the least amount of effort on their part. One of the best ways to do this is to make sure that your environment doesn't become interrupt-driven. And what I mean by interrupt-driven is that problems are pushed to us, problems are pushed to us, not pulled by us. Think of all the time we lose when we get off track for that drive-by task or that quick question, right?
You know the one.
It takes you away from things that you've already committed to, and it makes you appear unreliable. So if we're not careful, we end up addressing the latest and the loudest, whether or not that's justified or not. So let's talk about some of these public-facing policies. Number 1, are user requests tracked via a ticket system? It's super obvious, it's painfully obvious, but this is better for everyone. Out of curiosity, are people using a ticketing system in here? Okay, that's a pretty good amount, but there's still a few more that could try one out. There's lots of ones out there. Some things to remember. Humans don't remember things as well as computers do. That is just fact. Expecting sysadmins to remember every user request that comes in is a direct path towards failure and dropping requests. Keeping requests in a system improves sharing within a team so that people can work on projects together. That way, sysadmins don't end up duplicating the work of others, and they can divide the works among themselves. It enables better time management, and it prevents interruptions from people who want to make requests like this, because that's what I feel like some days. Management wins too, because they get visibility to things that become stalled in the process, and they get a better idea of your activity and that you can bring back when you have those one-on-ones.
Right. All right. Public-facing practice number 2. Are the 3 empowering policies defined and published?
Wait, Dennis, what are the 3 empowering policies?
Well, it's time for a quick sidebar. So there are 3 empowering policies according to Tom Limoncelli, and they are things that you must define and publish if a sysadmin team is going to get anything done at all. So first, you have to define the ways that you're going to allow people to ask for help. Ideally, those are methods that would funnel into your support request system. Sysadmins need to be empowered to redirect users to follow this policy. And if you don't do this, one of 3 things is going to happen. Your support team is going to respond to whoever gave you the request most recently, or whoever is the loudest about their request. And I'll let you figure out what loudest means in this context. They could also pick and choose what to work on, either picking the easiest stuff, picking the stuff they can get done fastest, and suddenly letting things slide. So you might have the person that's third in line throw up their hand and say, hey, wait a minute, why are you helping this other guy who was fifth in line? My thing's more important than that. And third, if you don't do this, your support team is going to get overwhelmed.
Please let me know if I'm in the way of any. I'm trying to find a good spot here to stand.
No, I think you're all right. So empowering policy number 2 is the definition of what an emergency is. An emergency can mean a different thing depending upon your particular industry. And you define what an emergency is so that you can actually handle the true emergencies. That keeps everyone in the same definition and nobody has to guess what to work on. Tom talks about 2 things, a code red and a code yellow. A code red in your industry could have its own definition. If you're in private business, it's probably anything that interrupts cash flow or production of your product, whatever it might be. If you're in education, it might be anything that prevents classroom tech from working or education from happening or anything that could be deemed dangerous to the health and welfare of students or faculty staff. And then there's code yellow. Code yellow is anything that if you leave it long enough is going to turn into a code red. And beyond that, according to Tom, everything else is fairly routine. And in general, we're trying to define what an emergency is so that we can deal with that age-old phrase, the lack of planning on your part does not necessarily constitute an emergency on our part.
You don't necessarily have to post that entire phrase above the door of your office,
Yeah.
but it's in the back of your mind.
All right, so empowering policy number 3, the scope of the service. That means who are you going to support? What kinds of equipment are you going to support? When are you going to support them? Where are you going to support them? So you might think about when are you going to support your users? You're going to support them during the day? Fine. You're going to support them in the evenings, in the weekends? Are you going to support equipment from the spouses of employees? Maybe, maybe not. Are you only going to support them if they happen to be the spouses of the C-level suite? Maybe, maybe not.
It's fun to watch the furrowed brows across the audience like, yeah,
Yeah,
I've been
seen
there.
So then you have to figure out where you're going to support that work. Just at the office in a remote site? Are you going to drive to somebody's house? Are they going to come and find you?
Students' parents coming to your house?
Yes, Brian had a story about that.
He needed a network switch. I had a network switch.
So did he find you at work?
No, he drove to my house. It was in my garage.
Knocked on your door and said, hey.
It was in the neighborhood.
Yikes. Okay, then you also have to figure out what are you going to work on. So there's clearly the stuff that your organization deploys. That may be fair game. Then you've got to figure out if somebody comes to you with a personal device. Is that covered? And defining what the expectations are can help you determine specifically what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. Is there a life cycle for the technology that you have? If you're going to sunset certain technology after a while, we'll talk more about life cycles soon. If there's new technology, if somebody gets a grant and buys a dozen of some device and brings it to you in a crate and puts it on your desk, do you automatically have to support that if you didn't necessarily have any consultation into what would come to the desk? You have to figure that out. Is there a vetting process that has to happen? Does there have to be an official request? If people bring in, do you get automatic support? So once you have these 3 empowering policies figured out, you have to publish them. Try and get some support from people above you, your boss, and have your boss get support from the boss above them as well. But getting that management buy-in is really, really important.
There's a word up on this slide, and I'll help you pronounce it because it's kind of tough. It's right up there. It says N-O.
We should all practice that.
Yeah, so.
All right, everybody all together.
No.
There you go.
There.
They can say it. It's good.
I just bought these box of widgets. So when it comes to recording monthly metrics, again, this ties into a couple of the other talks that you've seen here. You need to be data-driven when you make decisions, or you need to sway your upper management, especially when you're asking for things like money. The best way to develop your metrics is to create one metric per sentence or clause of your charter. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're on a PC deployment team, and you have a charter that says, we provide a high-end, standardized computer to each employee starting on their first day, refreshed on a 3-year cycle at industry-leading operational costs. Are there any other buzzwords I can get in there?
It's locally sourced. It's gluten-free.
Yep, non-GMO. So looking at that phrase, what are the metrics? Number of weeks since the standard configuration was updated, the cost of the current standard configuration, the number of employees that we've gotten onboarded this month, capital expenditures, operational expenditures, how many days new employees had to wait for a new deployment. And you can use buckets or a Likert scale. Maybe they got it prior to their arrival, first day, second day, more than fifth day. The age of your current fleet, buckets, less than a year old, 1 to 2 years old, 2 to 3 years old, older than 3 years. The count of the deployed machines on your network that have had to deviate from that standard. If you don't have a charter, talk with your manager about writing one. Alternatively, you can use some simple metrics that you can adopt today, like how many sysadmins do we have? How many users do we provide service to? Total disk space, RAM, CPU cores, I think in Monkey Report, total number of pixels in your fleet. You can get that.
If you have to.
Talk about tickets that were created since last month, average amount of time spent per sysadmin. There's tons of these metrics that you can find in ticket reporting systems, in any of these reporting systems. Just take a look at there and see what things fit your day-to-day tasks.
Right. Collecting those things allows you to have, if you collect them longitudinally, you can have trends. So if you are putting out more machines than you did last year, then the trend goes up. And when you go and ask for more money, it will be painfully obvious why you're doing this. It keeps you, collecting those things keeps you from saying, we're in charge of a lot of stuff, whenever somebody brings up ideas about having to argue for money.
Or when my kids ask me, Dad, what do? You just fix iPads, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about playing nice with each other.
So
in a modern team.
Yeah, in a modern team.
Think modern family.
Do you have a policy and procedure wiki? Tom uses the word wiki here, but that could be any kind of document that is available to your team, that's something that you can update on the fly so that the changes go out. Ideally, it might have a revision history.
++ for Google Docs?
Right. That's a good way to do it. So you're going to document two things: your policies, which is what should be done, and the procedures, which is how do we do those things. So I like to take a very event-driven approach to this when I've worked with consulting clients and when I've worked at Eastman as well. So I create procedures about what do we do when we get a new employee, when they start. We have to take a machine out of inventory. We have to make sure they've got their email address set up. Check with their manager about what software they might need. Check with their manager about what server SharePoints they might need access to. We talk about what happens when employees leave the company, or worse, if they're terminated, because sometimes those happen very quickly and we get notified very quickly that things need to go away. So what happens when you are deploying new machines specifically? What's the checklist that you run through to make sure that everything works right the first time? What do you do when machines are decommissioned? How do we add or delete a person to the VPN service? How do we change a disk in the RAID system on the server? How do we change the root password on all our machines if we need to, if that becomes compromised for whatever reason? Having a procedure in place that's already pre-written that you can work through really helps. And it helps because these things tend to fall into three categories. There are things that you want to be consistent about because your brain doesn't do well with details over time. There are things that you do infrequently enough that you don't want to have to spend time to relearn that procedure. People forget these things.
In education, there are lots of things we only do once a year.
Right. And there are things that you might have to do because they're an emergency, and you might be panicking, and you don't want to have to think on your feet, because panicking people don't think clearly. There are certain procedures that, for instance, that I only do once a year, or I might only do every 8 months or so. And that's why it's handy to have that guide in front of you. Tom uses that term wiki, like I said, but wiki can be useful. And
Confluence is another one.
That's right. And Google Docs can be helpful too. Whatever works for your team is fine.
Is anybody out there using a documentation system that they like a lot that they would want to share? Yep.
Well, we're using Confluence, but we're using Confluence in the cloud.
Okay.
So we can use it on the iPhone.
Oh, that's great.
We're using Google Docs a lot, but we're using Google Docs too much.
Okay, Google
So we,
Docs.
like, scroll because nobody ever deletes anything that's superseded.
Oh.
Right. We talked about
We're going to talk about that coming up.
Yes.
SharePoint.
Okay.
SharePoint. Okay, good. Windows admins in the house representing.
That's cool. So it's important to keep your passwords safe. And if you're on a team, you probably are sharing passwords. What is going on here?
Did you pay the registration fee?
Registration fee.
Oh.
It's all right. So you have to keep your passwords safe. And in a team environment, you're probably going to share a lot of those kinds of things. And you ideally want to keep these someplace that's secure, not in a spreadsheet, not in a text file. I've seen some people will keep them in encrypted disk images. That's one way to do it. But there are commercial products that attempt to help with this. One is a company named AgileBits has a product called 1Password for Teams. And there's another thing called Monkeybox that you can investigate. There might be others that you might be using. Sometimes people use things like KeePass and then keep things on an encrypted disk image as well. So these systems tend to have change history, and you can verify and document any updates that happen to it with those important passwords.
Yeah, the contextual data around that really helps to identify things. Yes, question?
Are you aware of any documentation system out there, like people, a lot of people talk about companies, that has anything in there that will help you manage passwords as well?
The question was, if you have a documentation system, does it have additional features that will help you manage passwords? The ones I've seen have typically been separate products. That's the security level that people want to have when dealing with passwords is often much greater. They want to store those encrypted. Sometimes in the wiki, just having basic authentication to get to it is enough. So it's kind of two different levels of security. And because of that, I haven't seen a product that combines both.
In 1Password for Teams, there are notes fields and URLs that you can put in. So for example, if it was the root password for your server, you might have a URL in there. Click this link to take you to the document on how to change the password. But no, I haven't seen a product that combines both documentation and password management together. Yes?
Yeah.
One very important thing to look for in a password management system, especially if it's cloud-based, look into the history of the company.
Yes.
Look at vulnerabilities, if they've ever had any, make sure that they've updated them quickly.
Yes, there was a comment about making sure to vet whoever your provider of
Remember next time.
password security happens to be, and figure out what does their track record look like with in terms of security. Yes, it's obviously very, very important.
The next modern team practice is about keeping your code in a secure control system. Revision history is key here. Now you might say, hey, we're not programmers. Generally, I would not consider myself a programmer.
Nor me, yeah.
A script
Nor
or two
I.
here or there. But scripts are programs too. And a common example for this would be your auto package and your monkey recipes, first boot scripts, plists, Apple ARD configurations, all the text files that make up a monkey repo. This keeps an audit trail and allows you to share it with others and be collaborative. So take a look at all the focus that you've seen this past week on GitHub, GitLab. Neither of us are developers, but this is still something that's very important to us.
Right, and since we gave this presentation last year, I can say that Eastman is now starting to use GitLab. We needed a place that was not going to be cloud hosted, and GitLab allows that to run that on our own infrastructure. So that helps us a lot. That didn't cost us anything. We're in education, and it was very useful for us. So, modern team practice number 4, does your team use a bug tracking system for their own code? Well, the good news is tools like GitLab and GitHub have bug tracking built in, and that's very useful. I think they just call them issues, and then you write code to fix the issue and mark it as closed and move on. But if you didn't have that, you could probably, if you had to, track bugs in your support management system and just mark them as an internal request.
When we first started putting this presentation together, we actually considered not including this slide because neither of us are actually programmers, and this is actually a policy that we don't really implement on our own. But it's important to include for the people who aren't us,
Right.
Which would be all of you. And it's also important to show that there are going to be some policies on here that just aren't applicable to you. This is not a set of rules that everybody must follow. It's a set of guidelines to guide you along the right path.
Suggestions. Okay. Does the stability have a higher priority than new features in your code? And if you're a coding shop, this could be very important to you. Tom thinks that this is a prioritization that you should make. Luckily, the things that we tend to write are not terribly long or complex. The bugs that we tend to have are usually typos that we've made, and once we find them, they're relatively easily fixed.
So now I'm going to get a little bit into the documentation relating to your question about sprawling documentation and things getting out of hand and not revisited. Design docs go by many names. I refer to mine as a site book, and I keep a site book for each location, and that is in the event that I get hit by a beer truck, I need somebody else to be able to come and take over for me. And as a matter of fact, my site book at our school is shared with Dennis, so in the event that I go missing, get abducted by aliens, or just don't return from MacAdmins, Dennis could share that information with whomever is going to take over my role.
Right.
So these describe the current state of your organization, the desired state, how a system should work, in general referring to your entire workflow as your system. For example, documenting your auto package and your monkey workflows, or the policy for adding a new employee. I have a template that I call my recipe card, and I use that for each line of business application that our company has, our school has, and it lists the vendor information, the licensing, the install notes, the support agreements, download instructions, even if it's an auto package, because systems break, and what's your backup plan?
Right. So when it comes to revising that, a lot of people will keep a expiration date on their documentation so that they have to go back and at least put eyes on it within a year and then reset that timer.
So you can use
That can be a good way to do it, or to determine if it's not relevant anymore and needs to be deprecated, and that can make sure that your notes are very focused.
And you can sort things by last edited date, and so part of your items for that week are looking at anything that was written with the last edited date of 1 year ago.
Right.
And then your job is to go in and revisit each of those policies and make sure that they are still relevant and they have accurate data, and it still applies to your organization.
Now, Brian is a team of one, so the docs that he's writing are generally for people he may not meet. I'm on a team of more than one, and one thing I do when we have design docs is I have one person write them, and I have them hand them off to someone else who then has to repeat the process based on what the documentation is specifically, with no other knowledge. And that's how we determine if the notes are complete, if they make logical sense, and if they've been written clearly.
Since I am a team of one of the items that I've talked about with my supervisor is when I do get to go on vacation, I have another local sysadmin come by and he covers for me while I'm out. And usually I tend to go on vacation when it's a little bit quieter at the school. So one of the things he can do while he's waiting for support tickets to come in is review my documentation.
Right. It can also be helpful to have, if you have a new hire, to have them start with the documentation, and then they can ask questions. Helps them to be more informed.
Sometimes things go badly. Never, right? So still document that, because it's a good likelihood that when or if it does happen again, you can now remember what you did to fix it.
Right.
Hopefully that can help you prevent it from happening again.
And if it's a useful fix, you can publish a blog post, do it anonymously, make sure Google finds it so that other people can find it and help them out.
None of us are as smart as all of us.
Right. All right, time for some Q&A.
Who can I bean with the catch box?
Anybody questions?
We'll go ahead and bring up our audience tools. It looks like we have one question in here already.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up on the screen. Question says, what do you guys use for documentation?
Right.
So I'll start here. I use Google Docs. Our school is heavily at the hardware layer. We are Appledale, Columbia, and at the software layer above that, we are Google, like drinking the Kool-Aid. So all my documentation lives in Google Docs. It is shared with a user that doesn't exist on the campus, whose username and password is written and saved in the safe at the school, so that in the event that something happens, they take that out and they open up that user, and that user is also a super admin and has access to all my documentation.
Yep. And at Eastman, we have a much older system. We're using MediaWiki for that. It is something that we are looking at moving away from. The version that we're using makes putting in things like screenshots kind of tricky. It takes a little extra work to do that. And anything that takes extra work or makes things more complex is less likely to be improved over time. So we are looking at other products and ready to move soon.
Does anybody want the catch box? All right.
Okay, all right.
Can I pass it?
Yeah. Everybody watch your laptops, watch your drinks.
Just for everyone's reference, I actually went back, I asked the question, I asked
okay.
all of you, just, no, not that one, the one about the passwords and the
Yes.
documentation and what was in.
Okay.
And I
Did you
knew
find
I'd
something?
asked it of someone else and found the answer. There is a product out there called IT Glue
Oh, this is great.
that
Real-time
does
follow-up.
password management and documentation, knowledge base, all of those things tied together.
Cool.
IT glue.
If somebody can make sure
yeah.
to put that in the Google Doc notes for the session.
Yeah, it's
that'd be great.
itglue.com.
Okay.
Looked it up, MonkeyBox was acquired by IT Glue.
Ah.
Interesting. Okay, so Monkey Block.
Worlds collide.
We got a comment from the audience that MonkeyBox was acquired by IT Glue. Interesting.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Any other questions?
All right.
All right.
Doing good on pace.
Okay, good. All right, moving on.
Diving into your systems.
Right.
These are the operational practices. What constitutes a service? Anything that's presented to the end user, NetBoot, DNS, all the things that run on your network. If they weren't running, would they result in a help desk call being generated? Any of those things, they would be considered a service. So could you rebuild it? And how about after you build something, could you do it 6 months from now and still remember that process? If I don't document, not only do I have to reinvent my learning process every time I do something, I repeat all those old mistakes, and then I have to learn from them again, and that's not a useful use of my time. Again, when you're under pressure, your memory is going to work even worse. All of you deserve a vacation.
Mm-hmm.
You deserve to come to MacAdmins.
Sure.
And you can't complain about being overworked if you haven't built a way to share the load. So when new people come onto your team, this is a great way to get people onboarded and feel welcome in the team. If they can learn by watching you, or they can learn on their own by going from your documented service docs, it saves time, and it makes you look less like the information hoarding curmudgeon that none of us want to be. It makes people feel welcome. It makes them feel included in the new team when you have these kinds of tasks documented. Also, if we are indispensable, how can we ever be promoted? You want your manager to know that, hey, I'm available to go to this new and interesting other project because I've got things taken care of here, and I can share it with my team. My team can handle the load. And finally, like we said before, put an expiration date on your documentation that ensures all of your policies and procedures get at least reviewed annually. Sometimes you actually have to do that for regulations, like if anybody happens to deal with PCI DSS compliance, you have to review those policies annually. That's required.
Okay. Operational practice number 2. Does each service have appropriate monitoring? And your monitoring on this should be based on the SLA from that ops doc that you made for that given service. If you don't have an SLA, then you can at least do simple, is this service up, is it down? That can be the minimum. And we'll talk about what kind of thresholds you might use for that in just a little bit.
Yeah, gosh, if I've learned a takeaway from this week, gray log is something I'm going to need to take a look at when I get back to Rochester.
Okay. So do you have an on-call rotation schedule? If you have a team of more than one, this idea of this schedule serves many different people. It serves you, it serves your customers, it serves management, it serves HR too. It serves you because it lets you plan for a life outside of work, again.
And you all deserve a life outside of work.
Yes, it's true.
Even you.
Thank you. The rotation improves your service to your customers too, because it gives them a consistent number to call that then will be farmed out to whoever is on call. Sometimes the numbers can also be subject matter based, so if they have a question about email, then that goes to an email specialist, or if they have a question about passwords, that can go to somebody who can help them with that. It serves management because it gives them confidence that somebody is going to be available when those requests come in. And it serves HR too, so that they're aware of how and when the labor hours are being allocated. If you think that you don't have a schedule, you probably already do. It just happens to be 24/7 by 365. And you can look into tools like Ops Genie or pager duty to do on-call rotations.
And automated so that when someone calls, you automatically know and everything gets routed correctly. I did try an on-call rotation at the school, but it turns out I'm on every week.
Yeah, a team of one.
Yeah.
So it might sound obvious here, but we do want our systems to be reliable. And we can preserve that reliability and stability by segmenting the environments that they operate in. If you're introducing untested elements into production, that puts your reliability at risk. And if you decide to take that risk, it might work today, but you may not be as lucky tomorrow or next week or 6 months from now.
These are the systems that are allowed to catch on fire, and these are the ones that shouldn't catch on fire, probably.
Yes. Yeah, you want to keep the stuff on fire altogether with the other fire. So you have to remember your SLA here, your service level agreement. You've committed to particular uptime or availability, and you need to ensure that those essential services are running and not compromised. Developers, if you have them, don't let them push code and test it on the production equipment. I know that sounds kind of obvious.
That's the opposite of good. It's ungood.
Make sure they have their own sandbox for testing those things. Make sure they have a QA environment for testing those things as well. And those separations should be clearly defined in your ops doc and explained to your dev team as well.
How many folks are familiar with the term Canary Process? Oh, good. So we're in Pennsylvania, so this is kind of relevant here. Many years ago in the coal mines of Appalachia, coal miners would bring a canary in a cage, and when the environment became too toxic, the canary, whose composition is a little bit less than that of a human, would expire before the humans did.
Right. So when the canary fell off its perch and fell to the bottom of the cage, they knew that there was too much toxicity in the environment.
You want that early warning sign in your environment. When you deploy a change out to the users, you don't want them to fall off their perches. So you do one machine. Maybe it's your own. Maybe it's one very close to you. Then you do some machines. Maybe your coworkers. Maybe the ones you don't like. And then you do many machines in a larger and larger group until you've completed your deployment. Any single failure along the way, you roll back your changes, you do it again, and you don't continue till the problem's fixed.
Right.
One, then some, then many. Monkey has catalogs that allow you to, for this purpose, that allow you to push changes to a few machines. Google Suite allows you to select certain machines to be in the rollout process or beta versions of Chrome before the rest of your fleet.
Microsoft Office has their Insider Fast.
Yep.
If you need to test new changes for things. Another important thing that we didn't mention in the notes, but somebody brought up last year, is to make sure whoever's doing this testing for you is somebody who typically uses that software. So if you have accountants who live and die in Excel, don't hand off the new version of Excel to somebody who lives in InDesign, for example, because they're barely going to touch Excel.
But you have to balance that. The person whose job is to make sure you all get paid, you don't necessarily want them to be the beta tester of your payroll management software.
Right. Don't disrupt the money.
Certainly ask them to be a contributor to the process and procedure for rolling it out, so you have good test cases and workflows, but maybe you don't want to put it on their machine. Just saying. In my case, I have a library of workstations right outside my office, and machine number 14 is the first one I reach as I walk out, and that is my test case machine. The library is great because it more or less has all the software we use because it's kind of central in the school, and any of the CART computers, their software is also replicated in the library. Any of the classroom, that's also replicated in the library. It's a good place that I can kind of get a little bit of everything. So I'll test on machine 14, doesn't catch on fire. I roll it out. I have the entire bank on that side. Then I roll it out to those. Then I do the whole library. Run that for a day or two. I don't get any complaints from students. Things generally tend to work okay. Then we'll start rolling out to the carts and then to everybody. One, then some, then many. As sysadmins, we have to automate things. And we do that for lots of reasons, beyond the fact that we're lazy. Because we're not. We automate things because it saves time and money. We automate things because it produces consistent results every single time. And we automate because it takes a burdened task and turns it into an unburdened task. And by that I mean burdened tasks are ones that require you to be the human that pushes the button on the keyboard. Yes, I want to release the toxic gases. Yes, I want to release the toxic gases.
No.
Simpsons reference, anyone? No. They take your time and your attention and exclusively while they complete. Unburdened ones are ones that you can run unattended, then go get a coffee, or take a little drinking bird and have it go back and forth and press the button for you.
Or go to a meeting or check in with users or
Right.
whatever.
All the other tasks that really require face-to-face time with your users. And you know that those unburdened tasks are going to run independently and they're going to run the same every single time so that when you come back, that process will be safe. So let's look at how we can evaluate our automation processes. Let's take a look here what we've got in our vendor gallery this week. Adigy, Meraki Systems Manager was here last week. We talked about Puppet and Chef, even Apple Profile Manager. Those are all ways to manage configuration, or take care of configuration management. Do you guys have a tool that can, based on your policies and procedures, apply predefined settings to systems en masse? And even better, can it detect changes on those systems and then remediate them? Last year when I gave this talk, budget constraints had me deploying profiles in payload-free packages on Monkey.
And it works.
It worked, but it certainly was not without its drawbacks. So now I have configuration profiles that are created and assigned through an MDM, through a nicely documented workflow, using DEP and monitored with Monkey Report. That gives me a lot more feedback. It allows me to see when things are out of line and has some built-in remediation processes in that workflow.
So, automation practice number 2. Do automated administration tasks run under a role account? Who knows? Hands if you have the understand the concept of a role account. Okay, some of you. So a role account is an account that doesn't belong to a human. It's one that you set up specifically to accomplish a certain task. So often we run automated procedures that run at predetermined times. For example, at Eastman, I do have some scripts that validate databases that we use to keep track of things. And it generally does those every night and sends me a report. At some sites, the scripts run under the credentials of an actual user. So if you set it up to run as yourself or to run as another admin on your team, that can be a bad thing because admins don't stay at places forever. If that particular admin goes away and that account doesn't exist after that, you have to plan for that. And sometimes the tools run as root. And that's not great because root has an awful lot of capabilities that a particular process may not need. Good sites tend to run these scripts under a role account. And you tend to make those, for instance, FileMaker server runs under a specific user that gets made during the instantiation and the installation of the server called FM server. And everything that happens there runs under that particular account. So even if IT staff goes away, these role accounts stay. You might have, again, a user named backup that runs your backup software. And this is a way that some sysadmins can be lazy. So if you're going into a new environment and you notice that there are some processes that run under a specific person's name, maybe somebody who hasn't been there in 10 years, you gotta watch out for that. So document these users, make sure that the information is put into the operations document for that particular service, just so that you're up to speed in case you need to make changes to it.
That also might apply to documents and procedures that are owned by users who may not necessarily stay with your organization forever. So watching service documentation ownership is also important.
Right. So do automated processes only email you when they have something to say? Notifications are great, but if you have a monitor that is noisy, you're going to lead to something called threat fatigue. Threat fatigue is sort of the boy who cried wolf syndrome. So the rules here are fairly simple. If it needs human action right now, have it send you a text message or a push notification. If it needs action in 24 hours, have it make a ticket in your ticketing system. If it's just informational, everything went fine on the run from last night, just log it to a file. You can check on it later. If there's no information to report, don't have it actually send you a notification. Don't have it send you a text message. Don't have it open a ticket. If there's absolutely nothing that you need to deal with, you need to keep your focus for other stuff.
Out of curiosity, let's take a quick poll. Managing the largest fleet. Anybody got 10,000 machines or more?
Okay. No hand. Oh, wait.
Oh, all
one.
right, excellent. All right, so you are the winner. That was easy. How many machines under your belt?
To be honest, I don't know for sure.
At least 10,000.
We're probably right at 10,000 more, probably maybe closer to 12.
Okay.
Excellent.
All right. What does your management environment look like? The short version.
It's a little messy, to be honest with you.
Okay.
We're a bit of, so we have a lot of Windows clients. We also run a VDI environment, and we have about 4,000.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
right.
Sorry.
So yes, he's got VDI and a boatload of Windows.
So yeah, we have some Windows labs, a lot of VDI, about 100 per school. I think there's 26 schools I think we
Okay.
have, and then about 4,000 Macs in our environment.
Great.
So for the Macs, we're using Jamf Pro.
Okay.
We got that about a year and a half, 2 years ago maybe.
All right.
We're trying to implement SCCM to automate some of the Windows tasks and making self-service available on both platforms.
Yes. Self-service is a great
Yeah,
place to
yeah,
head
we're
to.
trying to roll both of those out before the school year starts. So,
Good. Okay.
so that's where we're at right now.
Cool. Thanks.
Anybody in the 5,000 to 10,000 machine mark?
Okay.
All right. Do you want to share a little bit about what your organization looks like?
There's a coffee. I'll hand deliver it.
Good decision
We're a
you made.
one-to-one school with iPads. I
Okay.
believe last count we have about 8,000 iPads spread across 4 high schools, and then the rest are miscellaneous Mac and PC. Probably about, I don't know, maybe like 3,000 or 4,000 total. Yeah.
Cool.
Mostly Mac though. We're slowly dwindling like our PC numbers down as low as we can get them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Great. When you deal with a big fleet, you really have to have your ducks in a row, right? So we'll start with inventory. Is there a database of all your machines?
Right. Do you know what's on your campus or what's in your organization? You should know what you have. You should be able to find out what OS are they running? How much RAM do they have? Do they have the ability to take more RAM if you need to do upgrades? If you need to upgrade the storage, can you do that? Who is that? Who's the person who sits in front of that machine the most often?
That's kind of part of your inventory, humans.
Right. If it's a machine that you have a warranty on, how do you get service for it? And it's not just machines or laptops or desktops or iPads or phones. It's also things like your copiers or your printers. Do you have a vendor that services those? You'll want to keep track of who's the vendor we call that we have an arrangement with to provide service for those.
Wireless access points, switches, firewalls, vendors, outside antennas. Maybe you have a cellular antenna at your location.
The good news is there's lots of good tools out there that help you automate this process and do it pretty much for free. So if you are a Monkey shop, Monkey Report is a great tool for this. If you are a Jamf place, then Jamf Pro can help you with this. Even a free tool like Spiceworks can be one to investigate that can give you automated inventory.
Yeah, we saw yesterday some of the new features that have been added to Monkey Report. I can tell whether a user's keyboard backlight is on or off.
Wow.
That is some granularity there, folks.
Should you ever need to know.
That's going to come up in my one-to-one with my manager this year. Supporting 65 users with backlights on their keyboards. Just saying, carrying the workload here.
Okay. Fleet management number 2, is your OS installation automated? I don't even know. Where would we even go to learn about that? No, if you've been here this week, you've probably heard all about installing OSs on machines. And why do we do this? Because, again, it creates a uniform installation on a piece of equipment. And no matter when it was done this week, next month, you know that it's going to produce the same result. It also produces the same result no matter who is doing the process. So if you've got multiple people on your staff, you know you're going to end up with the same load. And It's going to remove those inconsistencies. We also recommend that if you are going to take a machine from someone who's no longer with your company and move it to someone else, go ahead and do a wipe and a reinstall before you move that machine, just to return it to a known good and supportable state. So this past year, something that's happened since we gave this presentation last year, I had an opening on my team, and we are a large university and have a fairly decent benefits package, so we got boatloads of resumes from all corners of the globe. And reviewing all those resumes became a very time-intensive task. There were people who were applying who used to be tow truck drivers. There were people who are applying that worked in as EMTs, or I'm sorry, dispatchers for EMTs. And there were some people who were programmers, and what I needed was somebody who had Mac-specific skills. Eventually, we had to bring in a contract recruiter to do this, and the people that they were supplying weren't that much better. So the thing, I eventually reached my boiling point and said, look, recruiter, here's what you need to do. And I think that this is helpful. If you end up in a situation where you have to advertise a position, one of the questions you can use to weed them out goes like this. Have them ask the candidates, have you ever installed software on a Mac without sitting in front of it? That reduced the pool of candidates way down and increased the quality and compatibility of those people with our environment. Suddenly it was people, oh yeah, I've used ARD. Okay, yes, in my last job we actually did use Monkey. Way better. And I didn't have to interview dozens and dozens of people that way just to find out that they weren't necessarily qualified for what I needed. I got the best fit.
When you do patching across your fleet, can you automatically patch your entire fleet, or are you going machine to machine to machine? I talk to a lot of sysadmins that have 500 PCs and a couple labs of Macs, and so they're still touching every Mac individually. That's a poor use of your time. Another reason to automate things, not just to save time, but to ensure consistency. And we keep harping on this consistency thing, and for good reason. When things are inconsistent, it reflects on the reliability of your network, and then the reliability somehow becomes an extension of you, because people want a throat to choke when there's a problem, and you don't want it to come back to you. But you can't blame an inanimate object because that's not nearly as fun. So we do everything in our power to make the experience as robust and reliable as possible, because IT should be something like oxygen. It should be ubiquitous, everywhere. It's absolutely necessary, and it should be totally invisible, right? At least in my environment, that is the approach that most people would like to see.
Right.
It is a tool that they use to do their job, not the reason for them coming to their job.
Yes, so being able to patch software, again, lots and lots of vendors that you've probably seen this week that will happily help you push updates of software out to endpoints without having to visit them individually.
Silent and frequent.
Right. Okay, do you have a system refresh policy? This is what do you do in order to make sure new equipment gets deployed. If you don't deploy equipment, let's say you just said, I'm not really going to deploy equipment. When's it going to get replaced? Whenever something bad happens.
Genesis is on fire.
If you don't have a refresh policy, you might consider picking an annual. You might say every 3 years or every 4 years. So if you're doing a 3-year cycle, then you have to budget to replace 1/3 of your machines every year. Math works out pretty cleanly there. So, and you might do a certain number every quarter. So if you're doing them every quarter, that means you're replacing about 9% of your fleet every quarter.
Which means 1% every 10 days, or 0.1% of your fleet every day.
You were up late doing that math, weren't you?
I was.
So your CFO, your money person, is going to like this because it makes the expenditures very predictable. They can even pick when in the quarter that's going to happen. If three years is too often for you, or that would require too much money, Or if you don't have the staff to be able to make that happen, you might do a 4-year cycle, which again means you're going to replace a quarter of your machines every year, or about 6% per quarter.
It's time for Q&A. Who do I
Number
get to beam with the catch box?
No?
Q&A,
Okay.
the sequel.
We've got 3 people who have put questions in. Again, you can use that URL at the top of the screen, put your question in. If you see a question you really like, you can upvote it, move it to
Okay.
the top. So let's pull up the next one.
Is there a
Okay.
good example of documentation that can be used as a reference?
You know, we get this question a lot.
I don't know if it's good. I could certainly walk you through some of the stuff that I have.
Yeah, find us after the session.
Yeah. Nate Felton is a huge proponent of Confluence, and I'm sure he would love to show you Confluence.
I was just going to say that their Flounder blog is a good template for good documentation.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so-
If you guys aren't reading Rich's blog,
Theirflounder.wordpress.com.
Yeah, so that's certainly good for internal documentation. Maybe not your public-facing documentation, unless
Yes.
you have really awesome users. But yeah, it's a good sanity check for, hey, I want to write something that makes sense and is clear and concise. Like that's Der Flounder, so DERFLOUNDER.wordpress.com, and it's Rich Troughton's blog.
Yes, Rich is he's here almost every year. He's a fantastic presenter, and I call him the documentation king. He's done presentations here on that, which you can find on YouTube.
and his documentation has gotten me out of a bind on more than one occasion. His docs on how to package App Store apps was a go-to piece for me for at least a year's worth of deployments.
Right, and he also helped me set up a VMware infrastructure. He doesn't know it, but he helped me set up a VMware infrastructure so I could do testing without having to load software onto new machines, new physical pieces of machinery. So we have another question about if you don't have any documentation, is there somewhere that you should start?
Yes.
Anywhere. Start anywhere.
Take something that you do really, really often.
Yeah.
Pick a low-hanging fruit and start with that. And if you don't even want to take the time to write it, open up Google Docs and hit the voice typing tool. And as you walk through it, speak the process that you're going through and catch the highlights. You'll have to go through and edit it later, but you'd be surprised the steps that you do that you wouldn't think to write down. You know, that one obscure dialog box that you have to right-click and go into advanced properties and set some obscure setting. If you're speaking it as you go through the steps, even to an empty room, there's a good chance you're going to catch all that stuff.
Right. The other thing, like I mentioned before, take more maybe an event-driven approach of what do we do when somebody switches departments? What do we do when somebody gets hired? What do we do when somebody leaves the company? Start there, because those are the things you might do more frequently. The things you do more frequently might be an easier place to start. And make sure, again, to hand that off to someone else on your team so that they can work through it and find any bugs or things where you might have 2 things in the wrong order. That's a great way to keep the quality of your documentation up.
I was just going to suggest, this is often a really great job for an intern to start because they're not as familiar with your workflows and your environment as you are.
Right.
So they're going to be more likely to capture more details than you would because you're used to seeing everything all the
Yeah,
time.
they're not going to make the same assumptions that you might make. All right, next question.
Best ideas for an inventory database. Gosh, there's lots of options here. So I use Spiceworks. The reason I use that is because it pulls from Active Directory automatically and allows me to manually add things. So I have all my projectors in the school, and my projectors are not on any sort of network, so they wouldn't be auto-discovered. But it allows me to have all my inventory in one place.
Right. At Eastman, we have
Thank you.
used a couple of different systems over the years. I think we originally started with a custom FileMaker Pro solution, which lets us scan barcodes in and create a consistent inventory of what we have and who it got assigned to, what software is on it, when did it get purchased, when is it scheduled to be refreshed, things of that nature. That works really well for us. We've also taken a look at things like Meraki, and for our Macs anyway right now, we're also using Monkey Report.
And it's okay that all your stuff isn't in one database. I mean, that's ideal, right? If you can do that, that's awesome. But if you can't, for example, all my Chromebooks are in Google Admin Console. And I just wasn't interested in paying the licensing to have them also be in Meraki Systems Manager when there isn't really that much I'm going to automate or do with them in there. So I saved myself the licenses on those and have everything else in my environment in Meraki Systems Manager, and I look up serial numbers for my Chromebooks in Admin Control Panel.
Okay, and our last question here,
And then I'll pass this over to you.
we'll keep this moving. Do you have any inventory tips and tricks or do's and don'ts? I would say inventory tips and tricks. The sooner you can have one, the better, so that you know what's physically in the building and you can tell when things go missing, or you can make notes about the configuration of them. Certain large purchases may be required to be an asset that you keep more specific track of because they may have to be depreciated over time. So that's an important consideration. The things you should not do.
Don't put passwords in plain text in your inventory database. That's a no.
I would say don't ignore your database. Make sure to look at it often and keep it refreshed. Maybe, something you should do
Back it
is
up.
build a set of automated reports that you can run every year. So you can say, well, here are the 25% of our fleet that is due to be replaced this year, and they belong to the following 80 people. And we have to make contact with them and let them know that a refreshed hardware is coming, and you get to play Santa Claus and bring them fresh stuff and schedule with them how to transfer their existing information if that's important.
Because who doesn't like fresh new hardware?
Okay, Catchbox, go ahead.
No, it's just going to be one point.
Okay.
One of the things from in inventory and for a database thing is we use Web Help Desk
Okay.
as our ticketing system.
All right.
Web Help Desk has the built-in inventory, so we can add the pieces in.
Nice.
But we are also a Jamf shop, and
Okay.
Recon pulls everything directly into that.
Yes.
We're also self-servicing, and it talks directly to Apple's self-servicing portal. So
Yes.
it was a great kind of like catch-all for doing a lot of those things. The only thing it doesn't do well, in my estimation, is the knowledge base and the documentation, which is why I was
Right.
asking those questions earlier.
Right. Yeah, Jamf Pro has a very compelling product. And if your environment has the finances to be able to swing that, then definitely get a demo from them and see if that can offer some enhancement to your environment.
The one thing I would say about Jamf is Jamf saved me hiring multiple people.
Okay. So yes,
if
factor.
you're trying to make the budgetary thing for it, is I would probably have to have 2 more people on staff if I wasn't running that.
Right. Technology, and I've said this to my boss and her boss several times, when I started in the late 90s, technology meant a machine on your desk connected to a wired network, and that was it. And eventually laptops became more popular, and then tablets and phones became more popular. And now when we come to sessions or come to events like this, we can expect that everybody has at least 2 to 3 devices. And that expansion of technology has only grown and broadened over time. And we have the same number of staff that we that we did at that time. So being able to show that growth curve is very useful, and especially in trying to get funding for tools that can help you manage that growth. And if you can show me, I need to spend this many dollars on a management tool versus this many dollars for 2 additional full-time equivalent employees, then sometimes that becomes an effective way to argue for your tools.
All right, we're going to go into the third half of our presentation now, disaster recovery and security. Bad stuff happens to good people, but it's all about how you handle it. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Tom says, can your servers keep operating even during a hardware failure? So if you have a server and one of the disks dies, if you have them set up in a RAID configuration, this allows you to keep your servers up to date while you replace those failed disks. You probably also want to have multiple network interface cards, multiple power supplies, and maybe even redundant electrical circuits. Is anybody here who manages their own servers on site? Okay, a fair number of people. Good. So, and you may already know this, one of the key terms you're going to be looking for is hot swap capability. I also recommend having a collection of things that you could swap at any time on a shelf so that you can run and grab them if you need to swap a power supply on a piece of equipment. If you don't have the budget for those kinds of things, you might consider virtualizing a server and hosting it somewhere else that has that better reliability and better redundancy. And if you don't even have money for that, you might schedule a carbon copy clone to an external drive if you're running a Mac server, And then you could also use Thunderbolt adapters if you need to for your network interface cards, or USB 3 or whatever they decide to put on servers next. So yeah, Mac Mini server, we put server
Giant
in
air
quotes there.
quotes.
We're looking at you with this one.
If you're responsible for your network, think about the resiliency of your network. Is your network core what they call N+1? Your node should connect to a wall jack, and then to access switches, which are trunked to core switches, make that core redundant. Make sure there are multiple paths on your network. Make sure there are multiple paths to the outside world. At our school, we have a single path coming in from the outside world. There is a bridge, and our campus is on
Not
three
a
sides.
network bridge, a physical
Like bridge.
over water.
It's made of stone. It's very nice. And around three sides of our campus is water. So there's not a lot of easy way to get in there.
You have a
It's great
moat.
in case there's a raid and people try to come in. But in the event of a surgical airstrike and that bridge getting taken out, that is our only network connection to the internet. And you have to balance that. Maybe the cost of having a second line in there is not worth the 1 day of downtime you've had in 6 years. And that's a discussion you need to have with your C-level staff. These can be expensive, but sometimes less expensive than downtime.
Right. Are your backups automated? You need backups probably for about 4 different reasons. There's the oops, I deleted a file reason. There's the oops, the hardware on my desk died reason. There's the oops, the building burned down reason. So that's why you have an off-site backup. And then the what I call the sometimes why. You want to have an archive copy of certain information. We at Eastman have almost 100 years of audio archives that we need to preserve. We consider them the crown jewels of our music library. And having those in many locations and in secure locations is very important to us. So you could say love is never having to say, did I back that up? Or, ooh, I might not be able to get that back. So at the Mac user group that I belong to, I tell people, it happens to be a lot of, unfortunately, white guys over 40. Shocker, right? But they have kids and they have grandkids and they take a lot of digital photos. And unfortunately, we just don't have the negatives that we used to have anymore. And I tell the guys, fellas, are you married? And they say, yes. Do you have kids? Yes. Take a lot of digital photos? Yes. Do you want to stay married? Because backup is the way that you don't have to have that unfortunate conversation.
I lost the kids' photos.
Yes, and I'm being hyperbolic a little bit, but backups are great. Make sure that they're automated. Make sure that they give you reports about when things did not go correctly. So are you testing your disaster recovery plans? Things like, what do we do if a server goes down? What do we do if data gets deleted? No, way it shouldn't. Because really, nobody really cares about backups per se. They only care about restorations, the ability to bring things back. This means that on a regular basis, you should be picking a couple dozen files from various places and restoring them from a backup and standing up a server from snapshots and testing those.
Do your machines in your data center have remote power or console access? Can you get to them remotely or power cycle them if needed? Maybe you've got a KVM controller on your network that offers access and power management. Maybe you even have a video feed into your data center so that you can actually see things. As an army of one in my organization, and I also support a few clients on the side, because who doesn't, it's really important that I can kind of remotely touch any of the client's hardware no matter where I am. HP's ILO and Dell's iDRAC are kind of best-in-class tools for that sort of thing. In November, I was on vacation in Mexico, and about halfway back from Chichen Itza to our resort, I noticed we passed through Wi-Fi, and I got a message on my phone. One of my clients' server completely crashed, 4:45 on a Friday. So from my phone, I was able to jump into ILO, mount the ISO for the recovery disk, and point to the backup hard drive to the virtual machine for small business server, reboot the machine, and start the automation process. As I'm getting back on my flight, I didn't go home just for that. It just happened to be my last day. As we're taking off, and I'm dealing with customs and everything, I check on, yep, looks good. By the time I landed in Houston, backup was restored, customer was back up and running.
Great.
So having remote access can really take
Save your
quite a
chorizo.
load off of your shoulders.
So the last section here is an audit of your security practice. Again, this is by no means an exhaustive list. It's meant for you to just kind of evaluate the culture of security that you probably have in your organization. So security practice number 1, do systems run self-updating, silent, anti-malware software? In a pinch, I suppose you could count Gatekeeper as one of those things, but you might want to think about other endpoint solutions too. Ideally, you want to have something, again, that updates itself, and you want to pick on how often that's going to happen. You also want to potentially have a dashboard that can give you real-time stats about the state of your anti-malware. There are lots of solutions out on the market right now that hits that.
A written security policy is absolutely fundamental. In fact, you're probably going to want to have several of them because you've got several business units and several parts of that. Consider your user data. Consider the sensitive parts of your business like business and finance, health, fundraising, donor management. Each of these probably has separate requirements. If you handle any transactional data at all, like credit cards, then you're bound to having a security policy in place. These policies should be reviewed at least annually by any parties that are directly involved or impacted. Even if you're not responsible for things by regulations, you should still consider using relevant security policies. We put ours in our employee handbook and make them available for our users on their payroll portal. So when they're going to check out their paycheck, there's the employee handbook right there, and that's got our security policies, and they're prompted to review them once a year. SANS has some really nice templates, so does Clover Security, so I would recommend starting with some of those. This one here goes right along with the annual review of your policies. It's a good idea. Bang on those doors, make sure the hinges are still there. Even if this means using like a predefined process that you've agreed on internally, you update it regularly according to best practices. There's nothing that says you can't do this yourself, unless of course there's a regulation that says you can't do that yourself. In that case, establish a close relationship with an external partner, an external vendor you trust. In our case, our payment processor offers a specific set of tests that run monthly and sends me a very nice looking report.
Yes.
If
you have like business continuity insurance, sometimes they will be able to help you provide people who can do this kind of testing.
Yeah, and that was required for us. In the event that a user leaves your organization, can you remove that user quickly? Excuse me, more importantly, can you do that for a sysadmin? It's uncomfortable for us to think of a privileged user having to leave an organization, but it's a reality. We all want to be promoted and go on to bigger and better things, but prudent security practices are there for a reason. And it's a reality that we all that we understood when we entered this field. We hold the keys to a significant amount of information and power within our organization, and we should expect that when we walk out that door, it closes tightly behind us. And that protects the organization and it protects you, because if there's an event after your exit, you can't be blamed because you don't have those keys to that kingdom anymore. And you've documented the handover of that.
Right. The key phrase there is plausible deniability. That's if something bad happens, you want to
running
be able
against
to say,
MCP's timer right now.
Wasn't me. Okay.
Can you change your root passwords in an hour? If you can't, create a checklist of everywhere it must be changed within your documentation. Change the password globally by following the list and adding it as you remember other devices. For obscure systems, document the exact command or process. I remember I used to have one for
AeroHive?
AeroNets, the Cisco.
Oh, yeah.
The arcane things on there. If you have this ability, document how to activate the process. List all the exceptions, because there will be, and always automate what you can.
Right. Job interviews. Other uses for this. We had something that came up last year. They said, this would be really great. If you go in for a job interview and you don't know that much about the capabilities of the organization, pick half a dozen of these and ask the people, hey, do you guys have regular automated backups? What kinds of, where do you document your security policies? Pick things that don't sound too incriminating, but
tell me where you keep your root passwords.
But figure out what the culture looks like so that you know what you're going into. That can help you evaluate the company. And if you happen to be doing the interviewing, you might ask your candidates, tell me about how you handled sharing passwords in your previous job, or have you worked in an environment where you've had to do X, Y, or Z? Okay, one
we're really
last
tight
thing.
on questions here.
But we will attempt to do it.
So
in the meantime, these are the books that we like and recommend. The Practice of System and Network Admin by Tom Limoncelli and Time Management for System Administrators. You can get those at Amazon. Question, what anti-malware software do we use? At the University of Rochester, we use Sophos.
and we use Avast.
Right.
Nice single pane, packages nicely in Monkey, and also is free.
Okay.
So that's good.
And we are Brian Meehan and Dennis Wurster, and we are available on Twitter, and you can find us there. And we'll talk about that next time.
That's us.
Thank you.
Thank you.